Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. A ton of talent has hit the transfer portal the last 36 hours, and want to take a deep dive into this Penn State program and talk about some specific players and position groups they might be targeting as the transfer portal opens up. And I think a lot of Penn State fans probably share this sentiment that the wide receiver position needs to be the top priority. You have a young quarterback in Drew Aller who can push the ball down the field, make some eye-popping throws with the arm talent that he has. And you watch that Penn State offense, and it just seemed to have a lack of playmakers on the outside. And you look at the numbers, and those numbers back that up. Penn State only completed 10 passes, 20-plus yards down the field all year. That's actually less than the Iowa Hawkeyes, who completed 11. And you take a look at some of the numbers, 6.5 yards per pass attempt. That was 96th in the country. They were only averaging 5.3 yards per play. That's 73rd in the country. You look at the biggest hole in this Penn State team is the explosiveness of this offense. And many of you guys know that I'm very fired up about Coach Kolnicki coming in and scheming up some of those explosive plays. You also want to get the players in there. And I would expect Penn State to get relatively aggressive in addressing that wide receiver position. Really excited to get into it, talk about some of my top wide receivers that are available in the transfer portal, talk about their fit within Penn State. Before we get into it, just want to say thank you to you guys. And this is a Penn State team that we're going to be talking a lot about the next couple of weeks as they get into the transfer portal. You have a new offensive coordinator. I think James Franklin is going to get active. You already seen him send out some offers. Really excited to talk about this program the next couple of weeks. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And you talk about Penn State and what they need to do to close the gap, right? They are bumping their heads against Michigan, Ohio State. It is finding an explosive offense. That defense for Penn State last year was a national championship caliber defense. We saw it all year. What they really lacked was that offense, and especially hitting those explosive plays. And yes, the scheme of that offense was not great. I totally agree with that. But I think the talent in that wide receiver room is also leaves a lot to be desired. And you tried to address it with guys like McClain and Dante Cephas in the transfer portal last year, and it, quite frankly, didn't work. And that's going to happen sometimes. I would expect Penn State to attempt to address it again. And I got a list of wide receivers that I think would really bring some explosiveness to this offense. The first guy I want to talk about, in my mind, the biggest target Penn State should have in the transfer portal, and that is former five-star wide receiver Julian Fleming out of that 2020 class. And if you're a Penn State fan and you follow recruiting, you remember Julian Fleming coming out of high school. He's from the state of Pennsylvania. Penn State was in on his recruitment very heavily before he committed to Ohio State. And you get a lot of different kind of players in the transfer portal. Some players you have where they went to a school, maybe they just didn't have that talent level to play at the Power 5 level. They end up hitting the transfer portal, and they maybe take a step down to the group of five. Julian Fleming is not in the transfer portal because he's not a good wide receiver. This is a guy that I think if Penn State adds as an immediate wide receiver one in this offense, you're talking about a dude that was a former top 5 national prospect coming out of high school. And really the only reason I think he winds up in the portal is you look at that Ohio State wide receiver room, Marvin Harrison Jr., Emeka Ibuka. You have a ton of young talent that's coming up as well. He kind of just didn't have the opportunities that he wanted at Ohio State. So he hits the transfer portal as a guy that, if he's given the opportunities, I think this guy can be an all Big Ten caliber wide receiver, and it looks like a perfect fit, right? You were going after him when he was coming out of high school. He's from the state of Pennsylvania, and I think has all the talent in the world to be an elite wide receiver in this Penn State offense. If he's looking for opportunities to be a playmaker, Penn State is going to provide Julian Fleming those opportunities. Some of the things that I think make Julian Fleming special, the combination of the size, the speed, and athleticism is a little bit different, right? 6'2", 210, very physical frame, good with good body control, going up and contested catches, but he's a guy that can work after the catch as well. And you look at Coach Kolnicki and how he wants to operate this offense. He wants to get the football to his playmakers in space. And Julian Fleming at 6'2", 210 with the athleticism and speed and size, he's going to be a load to tackle in space, and I think would work perfectly in this Penn State offense. And kind of in a similar light, another guy that I think Penn State's already pursuing pretty heavily out of the transfer portal is the wide receiver Deion Burks from Purdue. He's from the state of Michigan. Kind of an interesting career for Deion Burks, an undervalued, underappreciated kid coming out of high school from the state of Michigan. He ends up going to Purdue. Not a lot of good was happening in that Purdue offense last year. I think we all know that. But you take a look at Deion Burks' numbers when good things were happening for Purdue on offense. It was a result of Deion Burks having the football in his hand. This is a guy that caught 47 catches for 629 yards, 7 touchdowns in a Purdue offense that could barely move the football. Again, and you talk about why I think he's a perfect fit within this Penn State offense with Coach Kotelnicki coming in. Coach Kotelnicki wants to run the football, ran the football 60% of the time at Kansas, but when he does want to throw, he wants to get the football in space to playmakers. And you're looking at a guy in Deion Burks who might be one of the best wide receivers in the country with the football in space. And so there's 2 ways to hit explosive plays. There's one where you're pushing the ball down the field, air yards, and having your wide receivers track the ball and make a play down the field. Another way to manufacture explosive plays is getting the football in space and letting your playmakers go after the catch. And I think Deion Burks would be one of those guys that if he gets the football in space, he's hitting those explosive plays. Now, on the flip side, there's another wide receiver that I think is kind of the opposite. Not the opposite in terms of he can't work after the catch, but the opposite in terms of you want to push the ball down the field and make that defense defend the deeper third, which really Penn State just didn't really have defenses do last year. It's a massive criticism I had of that Penn State offense is Donovan McCloud from Indiana. Again, Penn State fans who watch Penn State play, they remember Donovan McCloud running it up for Indiana against Penn State. This is a guy that was a quarterback coming out of high school. They took a look at him when he got to Indiana and said, you are a phenomenal athlete, and we're going to get you on the football field any way we can, whether it's starting at quarterback or whether it's being a pass catcher. He settles in as a full-time wide receiver in 2023 and has himself a day. I mean, 48 catches, 644 yards, 6 touchdowns. Donovan McCulley would be a nice counterpart to a guy like Deion Burks. And if you're looking for that bigger presence that can work vertically down the field, is an expert in those contested catch situations at 6'5", 200 pounds, Donovan McCulley, I think, would be that kind of target for Penn State. And the last guy I want to talk about in terms of being a wide receiver, and this is, I don't have much belief that, or not belief, but I don't have much reason to think Penn State will go after him, but you're talking about a type of player that I think would be perfect for Penn State is the former top 50 national running back, Raleek Brown, who started his career at USC as a running back, as a true freshman, as a sophomore, switched to wide receiver, and really couldn't find his way on the football field. At the end of the day, Raleek Brown is one of those players that's a perfect fit in this new Penn State offense under Coach Kotelnicki, where you're wanting to operate in space and get your playmakers the football in space. Raleek Brown, one of the more special players in the country at making people miss and hitting the big play with the football in his hands. He can get it done on special teams. Again, he's from California. He's transferring out of USC. Not many connections to Penn State. That being said, he's the kind of player, him, Deion Burks, those are the type of guys that I think could truly be difference makers in this Penn State offense in a wide receiver room that I really think is kind of void of any difference makers right now heading into 2024. And you look at having an opportunity to have a very explosive offense with Drew Aller going into his 3rd year, you got to give him the weapons on the offensive side of the ball for him to work. And I think guys like Raleek Brown, Julian Fleming, Deion Burks, Donovan McCulley would be massive targets for Penn State. Now, a few other positions that I think Penn State might be addressing in the transfer portal. Going to the offensive line, they offered this kid from Division II level shorter, Alan Haron, and Alan Haron's getting a ton of buzz for a lot of Power 5 programs. You're talking about a guy that has special traits and he's young. So he's a guy that maybe you get in, he doesn't necessarily start in 2024, but is a guy that probably is going to be a very good football player down the road. 6'6", 320 pounds, offers from Clemson, a couple SEC schools. Penn State has already offered him. I mean, yes, is there a question about the jump that Alan Haron's going to need to make from Division II to the Big Ten level? Absolutely. But you talk about adding depth and talent into that offensive line. Man, Alan Haron has to be a guy that excites you if you're a Penn State fan. And one other position that I think the kind of player excites me is going to that defensive line. And when we talked last year, Penn State fans said we need a bigger body on that inside of the defensive line. And yes, Penn State has one of, if not the best defensive lines you see in the country last year, right? Adissa Isaac, Chop Robinson, Danny Dennis Sutton. this was a off defensive line that Michigan could barely pass protect against. And that's why they ran the ball. Everyone's saying, why did Michigan run the ball all the time in the second half? It's because they couldn't pass protect some of these edge rushers. Now, you look at this defensive line and what kind of body type you might want to add to that Penn State defense. A bigger body on the defensive line inside, and that is Thor Griffith, coming from Harvard, already generating a ton of Power 5 buzz. 6'2", 320 pounds. He carries that weight incredibly well. One of the more stronger players you see in the portal. Doing a little research on him, benches 225 pounds for 45 reps. I mean, this guy's power in his hands, it's next level, and kind of fits the body type that Penn State might want to pursue on that inside. And you look at constructing a defensive line, not only do you want star talent, but you want depth. And Thor Griffith, whether he's starting, whether he's a rotational guy for Penn State, would provide a lot of talent, a lot of depth, and a body on that Penn State defensive line that a lot of Penn Staters, they want to see on that defensive line. The last guy I want to talk about, and you talk about high upside and potentially a position you want to target with some guys departing to the NFL, Terreno Pride. He's from the state of Illinois, went to Clemson for 2 years, phenomenal true freshman year, was banged up as a second-year kid. This is a guy that I think comes in, and you could see him getting mentioned as an NFL draft pick this time next year. I think the talent is extremely good. His true freshman year was incredibly impressive. And again, I don't think he's a guy that's transferring because he lost his starting job or cannot play at the Power 5 level. He's transferring because he wants an opportunity at a fresh start where he can kind of have a little bit of a change of scenery. And again, a lot of position changes at Clemson. He committed to Clemson for Brent Venables. So now he's looking for a new home, former top 40 prospect, has played at a high level at the college football level already. Terreno Pride would be an excellent addition in that cornerback room if you have guys that depart to the NFL draft. Those are a few positions that I would be targeting for Penn State. Again, I think we're going to be talking a lot of Penn State the next couple of weeks at that wide receiver position. I would expect to have a couple of bodies that are added. They tried last year with guys like Cephas, guys like McClain, didn't necessarily work. I think Penn State goes back to the well, tries to add some talent in that wide receiver room. Penn State fans, appreciate you guys rocking with the boys. Again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate y'all, and we'll talk to you guys later. Peace.